How exactly would you react to the news that aliens have landed on Earth? How do you think your neighbors or people around the world would react? As it turns out, UFOs are a real thing. On June 25th, 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an unclassified report titled Preliminary Assessment, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. The Pentagon had been ordered by the U.S. Congress in December to produce that report because of growing concern over U.S. Navy footage of, unidentified flying objects. The short, 9-page report doesn't really answer all of our questions, and it never uses the word alien or extraterrestrial. Instead, it seems to confirm what has become the predominant narrative lately, that there are many U.S. government reports of UAP, and that, quote, a handful of UAP appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. In 18 incidents, described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. This video is not going into more detail either from the report or about the evidence for or against UFOs. There's plenty of places right here on YouTube to go familiarize yourself with that. I'd recommend a recent New Yorker story by Gideon Lewis Krause titled, How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. Personally, I've always been a skeptic. I'd remind everyone that large amounts of people can and have been dead wrong about fantastical things in the past and the present. See the Satanic Panic of the 1980s for an example. What's not disputable, though, is that the UFO debate has risen to a new, more serious level. With all of this in mind, I think it's a good idea to begin asking questions about what it might mean for us. Will the knowledge that we're not alone finally bring humanity closer together, or will it tear us further apart?
I would hope that the knowledge that there were aliens out there would solidify people's sense that what we have in common is a little more important, but no doubt there would be immediate arguments about we need to spend a lot more money on weapon systems to defend ourselves, their new religions would pop up, and who knows what kind of arguments we'd get into. We're good at manufacturing arguments for each other.
It's by no means crazy to imagine the worst when it comes to first contact. We can be pretty confident that it's not stupid because well-known ignoramus Stephen Hawking actually lobbied successfully to get SETI to stop broadcasting messages, what's called active SETI, willy-nilly into space. Publicly, he said, quote, a civilization reading one of our messages could be billions of years ahead of us. If so, they will be vastly more powerful and may not see us as any more valuable than we see bacteria. Ironically, after his death, the European Space Agency actually broadcast a, quote, message of peace from Hawking, backed by music from the composer Vangelis of Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire fame, towards the closest black hole. Yeah, that happened. Science fiction writer Liu Cixin is best known for exploring this scenario in The Three-Body Problem. But let's instead look at one of his short stories, named Devourer. In it, a giant ground-shaking spaceship lands on the United Nations Plaza in New York City. World leaders and onlookers gather outside as an alien, a 30-foot-tall bipedal lizard named Fangs, emerges and greets the onlookers somewhat pleasantly. When the Secretary General asks what will become of humanity, Fangs says it's a good question and grabs a random person from the crowd and proceeds to eat him, eventually spitting out his clothes like a watermelon seed. Then he smiles and says, and I'm paraphrasing here, great news, everybody. You're delicious. As you can imagine, a lot of people didn't think this was great news, although Fangs promised them that becoming well cared for farm animals was considerably better than the alternative. This humorous first contact scenario definitely leans towards the bad end of the spectrum, as do the vast majority of first contact movies and novels. And for a long time, experts assumed that the reality of alien discovery would certainly precipitate a crisis. A 1953 CIA report called, creatively, Report of Scientific Advisory Panel on Unidentified Flying Objects, convened by Office of Scientific Intelligence, CIA, now widely called just the Robertson Panel for short, warned of, quote, the subjectivity of public mass hysteria and greater vulnerability to possible enemy psychological warfare. Or, put another way,
you want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
As it turns out, one of the only real pieces of research anyone really has on the topic, albeit accidental, is Orson Welles' infamous 1938 Halloween radio broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Many people listening had switched over from another popular broadcast, just missing the warning that it was a play, and just in time to hear Orson cut off what sounded like a music program to announce an alien invasion.
We interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
Some people were honestly frightened by the broadcast, and the newspaper had a field day, or month or two, writing amusing articles about widespread panic and hysteria. That became the accepted narrative about the event, and even to this day, it likely influences how we think others will react to the discovery of aliens. The truth, however, is a bit less exciting, with almost everyone quickly double-checking other news sources and realizing that nothing nefarious was actually going on. Perhaps the most obvious reason to worry about aggressive aliens comes from our own history. In pretty much every instance of a more technologically advanced civilization coming into contact with a more primitive one, it doesn't really turn out well for the home team. North American history presents one sobering example, as does the entire history of Western colonialism from East Asia to the Caribbean. The hit movie Independence Day uses this scenario, but with a twist that humanity comes together to fight and actually win. The motivational speech given by President Bill Pullman is considered a classic piece of movie history because it so succinctly makes the case for putting aside our suddenly insignificant differences to confront a greater threat.
We're fighting for our right to live, to exist. And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
This concept is one that many people clearly find attractive, including real U.S. President Ronald Reagan, who mused about it during an address to the United Nations in 1987.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war?
Later, Gorbachev himself told a story about meeting with Reagan during the Cold War. Quote, President Reagan suddenly said to me, "What would you do if the United States were suddenly attacked by someone from outer space? Would you help us?" I said, "No doubt about it." And he said, "We too." So that's interesting. Reagan's predilection for talking seriously about aliens actually spurred a kind of meta-conspiracy theory that the U.S. and other countries might fake an alien invasion in order to force the creation of a new world order. One illuminating example of a culture encountering the mostly unknown comes from our own history, when U.S. Commander Perry's fleet of 4 steam-powered ships pulled into Tokyo Harbor in July of 1853. Japan had encountered the West some 200 years earlier, and their reaction was to call for a strict closed-country policy. Since then, there had been close to no contact. Herman Melville wrote about it in his 1851 classic, Moby Dick, quote, "If that double-bolted land, Japan, is ever to become hospitable, it is the whale ship alone to whom the credit will be due, for already she is on the threshold." Of the actual encounter, Perry's account reports that the fishermen seemed astonished to see the steam-powered American vessels proceed against the wind with their sails furled. Japanese officials in boats approached the American ships several times, asking them to leave. And crews of Japanese guard boats made several attempts to board Perry's ships, but were repelled by Americans with pikes, cutlasses, and pistols. Perry also brought along one of the most powerful weapons of that time, Vixon's guns, capable of firing explosive shells at high velocities to help make their point. And they did, using the guns to blow to pieces a number of wooden buildings along the shore. Perry's fleet left after only 5 days, but returned a year later with a larger fleet and formally opened relations with Japan. One young Japanese man, Yoshida Shoin, was incredibly moved by the appearance of Perry's giant ships. He tried to stow away on board in order to see America firsthand, but ended up being arrested for the effort. Soon after, he began teaching at a small rural school, and of the few dozen students he taught there, one became Japan's first prime minister, another founded Japan's modern military, and more than a dozen others helped start what became known as the Meiji Restoration, Japan's Industrial Revolution. In a broad sense, that effort continued until the end of the Second World War in 1945. Author William Gibson described the Perry incident like this, quote, "It must have seemed as though these visitors emerged from some rip in the fabric of reality. Imagine the Roswell incident as a trade mission, a successful one. Imagine us buying all the gray technology we could afford. No reverse engineering required." The psychology of first contact isn't a topic that's been particularly well explored, but archaeologist James F. Strange wrote about it in Alien Worlds, Social and Religious Dimensions of Alien Contact. Initially, he says, indigenous people, we're the indigenous people in this scenario, are likely to be baffled because they have no idea what they're seeing. Are those sailing ships giant fish or swimming houses? But, Strange says, they soon begin responding to the visitors on the basis of assigned identities. In first encounters, though, assigned identities are mistaken identities, since they are based on familiar ideas and imagination rather than reliable knowledge. That is, they think about the visitors in terms of entities that they have encountered, cultural stories and myths, and may confuse the new visitors with gods or demons. This model lines up extremely well with one of the only documentary films we have on the subject. Nominated for an Academy Award in 1983, First Contact recounts an Australian gold prospecting expedition into New Guinea in 1930 and its encounters with the people there.
Amigo vati kamatem papa bromina. Miru kim wepraman. Miru kim na mino guru gustret. Mi plet no guturu. Nami wokro krai krai.
I thought we were spirits.
But in the book community can win a good in a Hasu women are very keen at Alikinam, never can amon in. Or I have a very coronaman, a Kurma put in a neck, open a Maka, Masasum, and a very cow in a book.
So Simani Sapra Orokanakai height in a Luguru Koriko Pepek Pinis. Ori come to came Roman, no even now to Pepek are happy. Now, ori rusim the Seraperes or Carapico Pinis in Hapro Capuco, Igor Semor Hasaro. But Auntie Mani Savi Guru when I come. Iguru. Now, it's no good now, and Pepekia one kind of semi prayer. Sigin Brogori come up for seminar placai.
Of course, we're the primitive society in the alien encounter scenario, so it's fun to imagine just how wrong we might get things. The possibilities for ridiculous and humorous mistakes are endless. When science fiction imagines first contact's effect on a less developed society, it typically imagines bad things. Star Trek has its prime directive, an edict meant to shield the natural development of a society from even the knowledge of a more advanced civilization. There are a number of stories, including the TV series V, which deals with friendly aliens that transform Earth society, seemingly for good, but all the while harbor a more sinister intent. As humans, we understand inherently that any relationship with such a large power imbalance is potentially a very dangerous relationship. In the Stargate TV series, the entire premise of the Air Force keeping it secret is the possible panic and mayhem the truth may cause. It gets even worse when the primitive society actually gets some new advanced technology. Science fiction writer Charles Stross wrote a couple of novels imagining the singularity played out on Earth, beginning with an alien civilization giving us a universal constructor machine which completely nullifies the entire Earth's economy overnight. Examples of positive contact with aliens are few and far between. There's the adorable E.T., of course, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind seems to get us off on the right tiny gray foot. Star Trek's Vulcan contact is probably the best example of a positive outcome, but only because Vulcans adhere to a strict prime directive of their own. So, when we do imagine a good, transformative outcome, what exactly are we thinking about? One reasonable example is the concept of aliens saving us from ourselves. Just search aliens and nuclear weapons, and you'll find dozens of stories about UFOs dismantling US or Russian arsenals. All of them unsubstantiated, by the way. In the 2008 remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, Keanu Reeves, the alien, gives us an ultimatum about climate change. Either we become better stewards of this precious blue paradise, or they'll find someone else.
Why have you come to our planet?
Your planet.
The 1951 version dealt with the predominant anxiety of that time, nuclear weapons. What this might tell us is that when we think about aliens, we're really thinking about ourselves. We're imagining something so big and powerful and amazing that it makes our present troubles, our inability to do big things or the right thing, seem pretty small and petty. The knowledge resets our perspective to one that can now imagine doing big, difficult things, to be better in multiple ways, and perhaps, most importantly, to expect that the rest of us feel the same way. I don't know if the unidentified aerial phenomena that had become a big, trending thing this year are aliens or just unidentified. But maybe it doesn't matter. If we all participate in this giant thought experiment, maybe we can reset our own perspectives and actually do some of the things we think we need to be forced to do. And just maybe we're all fired up about UFOs now because deep down we know it's time to make some changes. I doubt it will happen overnight, like it might with a first contact scenario. But perhaps it will help us imagine and create the bright future we want, the way we want it, and without the sort of alien Damocles hanging over us the whole time. That sounds pretty good to me.
Oh, it's beautiful.